For some reason, all of a sudden, people care that Hegseth, the defense secretary, or the Department of War secretary, ordered a murder. All of a sudden, people care. So Pete Hegseth is in a little bit of hot water. He's being investigated by two congressional committees. Congressional committee in both the House and the Senate have launched bipartisan investigations into reports that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered a double tap strike on a Venezuelan boat in the Caribbean on September 2nd, which allegedly killed two survivors clinging to wreckage after an initial attack. The strikes targeted vessels suspected of drug trafficking. No, they weren't. To Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's regime, but the follow-up order has drawn accusations of violating the laws of war and potentially constituting a war crime, as it prohibited rescuing or sparing survivors. Well, obviously that boat wasn't transporting steroids, or Pete Hegseth would have let it slip right through. Am I right? Come on.
Yo, he's not in charge. It's that I can't remember the guy's name, but there's a shadow secretary. He's the front man, so he's going to take, like when the mob had a street boss and a secret boss. Yeah. He's that.
So a reporter asks Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary for the president, does the administration deny that the second strike happened, or did it happen and the administration denies that Pete Hegseth gave the order? She says the latter is true.
Excuse me, regarding Venezuela, the president said yesterday that Secretary Hegseth had denied that second strike, the reported second strike on an alleged drug boat on September 2nd, the secretary said to the president that didn't happen. But to clarify, I just wanted you to clear this up. In his social media post, Secretary Hegseth didn't go into details about that strike. He just said U.S. operations in the area were lawful, and he said that the story and media reports were fabricated. So to be clear, does the administration deny that second strike happened, or did it happen and the administration denies that Secretary Hegseth gave the order?
The latter is true, Abe, and I have a statement to read for you here. President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated. And
the threat was eliminated? The boat that couldn't get anywhere near our shores was blown up? You mean that threat? All it accomplished was turning a bunch of fish. It did not. What? The threat was eliminated. The threat. Secretary of State. So here's the problem. A new Washington Post investigation reports that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth personally gave the order to kill them all during the first U.S. boat strike in the Caribbean on September 2nd. And of course, you know, if you think that Donald Trump is trying to stop drug traffic from Venezuela, I have a vaccine I'd like to sell you. You're a dupe. The United States have been trying to overthrow Venezuela for 30 years. Donald Trump tried to do it in his first term. And they just keep changing the reason. According to multiple officials with direct knowledge, U.S. surveillance confirmed a suspected drug-running vessel, and Hegseth's spoken directive was to leave no survivors. After the first missile strike, 2 men were seen alive in the water. The special operations commander overseeing the mission ordered a second strike to finish them, reportedly to comply with Pete Hegseth's order. SEAL Team 6 carried out the operation. Law of war experts and some U.S. officials say the campaign is illegal, as the suspected traffickers pose no imminent threat, and the U.S. is not in a lawful armed conflict with them. One former military lawyer called the killings murder, adding that the order to kill incapacitated survivors would constitute a war crime. So, well, you know, we're just like Israel. We're doing it. The Pentagon denies the report, calling the narrative completely false, but internal briefings to Congress have frustrated lawmakers who say the explanations don't add up and key footage has not been provided. Since the first attack, at least 22 more boats have been hit and more than 80 people have been killed, with little public evidence that they were combatants. A direct order to kill everyone on board, survivors included, and growing debate inside the U.S. government about legality. So here it is. Legal experts accuse Hegseth of war crimes, murder, or both after a new reporting on boat strike order. 2 Republican-controlled committees also said they were opening investigations. Yep. The Washington Post reported for the first time on the directive Hegseth gave to special operations commanders as intelligence analysts reported that their surveillance had confirmed that 11 people aboard the boat were carrying drugs to the United States, an alleged crime that, in the past, and in accordance with international law, would have been prompted U.S. agencies to intercept the vessel, confiscate any illegal substances that were found, and arrest the people on board. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what we've done in the past. The former JAGS working group. So those are, what does JAGS stand for? Isn't it a judicial? Anyway, look it up.
Judge Advocate General.
Judge Advocate General. So those are lawyers in the military. The former JAGS working group, which was established in February in response to Hegseth firing of Army and Air Force JAGs, said that the dismissal of the military's top legal advisors, by the way,
would you explain what a JAG-off is? I don't think I need to, sir.
Okay. They're called JAG officers, or a JAG-off. So they've killed more than 80 people. And there it is. In pursuit of warrior ethos, Hegseth targets military's top lawyers. The defense secretary has repeatedly derided the military lawyers for war crimes prosecutions and battlefield rules of engagement. So he fired them. He got rid of them. And they all agreed, all those people, that the former JAG working group unanimously considers both the giving and the execution of these orders, if true, to constitute war crimes, murder, or both. So, for some reason, all of a sudden, people care that Hegseth, the defense secretary, or the Department of War secretary, ordered a murder. All of a sudden, people care. I don't know why. Hegseth's systematic dismantling of the military legal guardrails led to the formation of this working group, pointed out the former JAGs. Had those guardrails been in place, we are confident they would have prevented these crimes. So he knew he was going to go do these crimes, so he got rid of all the people who were going to hold him accountable for it. The working group said Hegseth's order to kill everybody could be understood in one of 2 ways: a demand for the U.S. military to carry out a clear war crime, or for those involved in the operation to commit murder. Regardless of whether the U.S. is involved in an armed conflict, law enforcement operations, or any other application of military force, international and domestic U.S. law prohibit the intentional targeting of defenseless persons. If the Washington Post and the CNN reports are true, the 2 survivors of the September 2nd, 2025 U.S. attack against a vessel carrying 11 persons were rendered unable to continue their mission when U.S. military forces significantly damaged the vessel carrying them. Under such circumstances, not only does international law prohibit targeting these survivors, but it also requires the attacking force to protect, rescue them. Not only are you not supposed to kill them, you are compelled to rescue them and treat them as prisoners of war. Violations of these obligations are war crimes, murder, or both. There are no other options. So, the Joint Special Operations Command previously told the White House that the double tap strike was necessary to sink the boat to avoid a navigation hazard to other vessels, a claim that Representative Moulton of Massachusetts, a Marine Corps veteran, called patently absurd. Mark my words, it may take some time, but Americans will be prosecuted for this, either as a war crime or outright murder. Trump should just pardon him right now. So here's from the National Review, which is no lefty rag. It says, we intend to strike to be lethal is not a defense. So this guy writing for the National Review, Andrew McCarthy, he says, an explosive Washington Post report, the subject of so much discussion the past 2 days, says that in the first missile strike, the Defense Department carried out against operatives of a boat suspected of transporting narcotics on the high seas off Venezuela, 2 survivors were rendered shipwrecked. As they clung to the wreckage, the U.S. commander ordered a second strike, which killed them. If this happened as described in the Post report, it was at best a war crime under federal law. I believe the attacks of these suspected drug boats without congressional authorization, under circumstances in which the boat operators pose no military threat to the United States, and given that narcotics trafficking is defined in federal law as a crime rather than a terrorist activity, much less an act of war, are lawless, and therefore that the killings are not legitimate under the law of armed conflict. If it is not permitted under the laws and customs of honorable warfare to order that no quarter be given to apply lethal force to those who surrender or who are injured, shipwrecked, or otherwise unable to fight. The laws of war, and they are incorporated into federal law, make lethal force unlawful if it is used under certain circumstances. Hence, it cannot be a defense to say, as Hegseth does, that one was killed because one's objective was lethal kinetic strikes. According to CA3, persons taking no active part in hostilities include those placed in hors de combat by sickness, wounds, detention, or any other cause. So that includes persons who've been wounded in an attack and are shipwrecked. So finally, I would observe that, again, if the Post report is accurate, Hegseth and his commanders changed the protocols after the September attacks to emphasize rescuing suspected smugglers if they survived the strikes. Now, if you remember, we covered this. So after they went and did the double tap and killed those guys, they then would rescue the people who they blew up on the boat, if there was anybody, and release them back to their own country. And remember we said that? That's right, because the reason why they released them back to their own country instead of bringing them to prison and giving them a trial is because they don't want to have the discovery at a trial that they were fishermen and that the United States is murdering people in a ramp up to overthrow the Venezuelan government so we can steal their natural resources.
I was a little suspicious when they just killed all them people on the boat and didn't offer any evidence of anything, Jimmy. That's when I first got suspicious.
And he goes on to say, this is why the 2 survivors in a subsequent strike on October 16th were captured and then repatriated to their own native countries, Colombia and Ecuador. They just let them go. This was a ludicrous outcome. Under prior policy, the boat would have been interdicted, the drugs would have been seized, and the operators transferred to federal court for prosecution and hefty sentences. Under the Trump administration's policy, if the operators survive our missiles, they get to go back home and rejoin the drug trade. That's their new policy.
Oh, then maybe a podcast after that. A nice Sean Ryan show.
The point is that if the administration's intent to apply lethal force were a defense to killing shipwrecked suspected drug traffickers, the policy wouldn't have been changed. But they did change the policy. It was changed because Hegseth knows he can't justify killing boat operators who survive attacks, and he sends them home rather than detaining them as enemy combatants because similarly, there is no actual armed conflict. So there is no basis to detain them as enemy combatants. Reminder, Admiral Alvin Holsley, the commander overseeing the operations in the Caribbean, announced his resignation the same day as Hegseth's illegal kill them all strike against survivors. He says he knew that they were committing war crimes and he didn't want to be part of it. Pete Hegseth denies he gave orders to kill everybody on alleged narco boats. So now he's denying he said it.
They were bragging about it when they did it.
They were bragging. And underneath, Kenneth Ross says, Pete Hegseth suddenly notices that he could be prosecuted for ordering the summary killing of people in boats said to be transporting drugs. There is no armed conflict, so these people should be arrested, not executed. And Max Blumenthal says, it's now clear why the top JAG officer in the U.S. Southern Con leaked his opposition to Trump's extrajudicial murder campaign in the Caribbean. The Southcom commander announced his early retirement, and Hegseth booted the press from the Pentagon just days after ordering this war crime.
I remember that.
So now we know the rest of the story.
They had new rules, no more wandering around getting the story like you used to. Remember that?
And why can't you leave those guys alive that survived that ship? Because they're witnesses. And why when someone survives, you have to send them back to their own country instead of a trial? Because they're witnesses and they're going to tell you that they're fishermen. Wow. So Pete, looks like, I wonder, we'll see. So they got two committees investigating Pete Hegseth, one in the Senate, one in the Congress.
Why was he ever appointed? Also, why was Dan Bongino, who, have you seen the emails come out that he was helping to redact Epstein's shit?
Yes.
While he was talking shit? Why were any of these people appointed in the first place? I know I should be mad at Pete Hegseth, but why did Trump put them there?
Because they're loyalists to Israel.
Oh,
that's why. So the donor class said, let them. So you saw Dan Bongino. You saw that. The thing is, what is the one thing you're passionate about? And he said Israel. That was his first thing.
Defense of Israel. The one thing you're passionate about.
The one thing he's passionate about, defense of Israel. So of course,
that explains the Epstein thing.
And that explains the Epstein thing, and that explains Kash Patel too. All right. See me on tour in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, Waikiki, Hawaii, and the Comedy Store in Los Angeles. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.